Hi, and welcome to the Two Texts podcast. I'm here with my co-host John Andrews, and my name is David Harvey. This is a podcast of two friends from two different countries, meeting every 2 weeks to talk about the Bible. Each week we pick one text to talk about, which invariably leads us to talking about two texts and often many more. This season we're taking a long, slow journey through the book of Acts to explore how the first Christians encountered the disruptive presence of the Holy Spirit.
Well, hi, David. We are back, and my goodness, leaving chapter 26 of Acts with this amazing moment of Paul and King Agrippa almost, or do you think you could have persuaded me to be a Christian? And of course, this incredible climactic moment where Agrippa says, actually, this man, Paul, could have been set free if he hadn't have appealed to Caesar. So it does feel like there's something providential here. As we're about to flip into 27, there's a one sense in which we could be reading this chapter as, oh, this is just another moment in an event. But having gone from 26 into 27, you feel there's something deeply providential about Paul's appeal to Caesar and how things have ultimately worked out in the context of this journey.
And also, just for the record, we also outed ourselves in the last episodes of being King James Bible fans.
Indeed. I think we both reached for the King James quote at the same time, didn't it? It was quite amazing.
It's so funny. I made it as a joke, but let me now make a point about it. Actually, just reading widely your translations of the Bible is something I think we've said a long time ago in this podcast, but probably worth reminding. It's good to have 2 or 3 translations on hand when you're studying the scriptures, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. I find it really helpful, and especially for people who maybe are less confident or completely unaware of original language conversation. Yes. I think if you can get 2 or 3, maybe 4 really good translations in play, it'll sort of get you in the ballpark. You know, yes. you're going to be pretty close to what the author intended, even if you haven't got the facility of digging under the surface as far as the language is concerned.
Yes.
And I still find that marvelously helpful. So, you know, I have a basic workhorse translation that is my day to day, but then there would be 3 or 4 that I would reach for. Oh, I wonder what ESV says in that, or I wonder what NRSV says there, or I wonder what. And I just find that really, really helpful. And in some stuff I do, you know, I reach because I love Peterson and I love some of the stuff he's done in the Message and some of his brilliant attempt at translating difficult concepts, especially in the Hebrew Bible, into modern language. And sometimes I wonder what Peterson says, how he translates this. And I also have N.T. Wright's sort of translation of the New Testament, which again, I really enjoy. Some of his insights and reflections on the text, really, really good. So yeah, it all helps because we're all learning and growing, and anything that's going to help us get close to what we think it originally meant, it's got to be a good thing. Got to be a good thing.
I think the point you made there is really important, that if you can get your hands on a few translations, which with some of the websites that are out there right now, and there are many, and the apps that are out there, but I take something like Bible Gateway, and not that I want to sponsor one website over another, but all the translations are available on there.
Amazing.
You can line them all up, and it's available there for you for free. And so, and one of the other things that often happens is people will ask me, oh, what's the best translation? And there really is no such thing as the best translation.
No.
Each translation will have its strengths and weaknesses. Oftentimes you'll find translations with certain theological biases that's worth you doing a bit of research into.
Indeed.
But if you were to sit down with, and here's 4 or 5, if you were to sit down with the New International Version, the New Revised Standard Version, let's say something like the New American Standard,
indeed,
the ESV and the Message, or Tom Wright, for example. If you were to look at one verse in all 5 of those, any of the theological biases that one of the texts had used would be exposed by the others.
So true.
And I often used to say to my students, if you're looking at one Bible verse in 4 or 5 different translations, and by and large, it says the same thing.
Mhm.
You can pretty be certain that if you also were a Greek scholar, if you
Yep.
looked behind the text, you'd be like, yeah, that's what it says. Right?
Yeah.
If you're looking at, this does occasionally happen, if you're looking at one Bible verse in 4 versions and it's kind of different, and I don't mean like they said sofa instead of couch. I mean like it's different in a way. That's when you reach for your commentary.
Indeed.
Because you'll probably find, oh, this language is quite difficult here. And then you reach for your commentaries and that triggers you off to do your study. And actually, most people would become pretty decent Bible scholars without any biblical language ability.
It's true.
If they did
true.
something just as simple as that.
Absolutely. And we are, like, certainly if you're sitting in a similar context that we are, David, where we are sitting in a Western context where most of us have relatively affordable access to the internet, we are resource rich, and there's more and more resource coming online, which is absolutely free. And, you do not, I mean, I've just been teaching today, and I've been teaching to a very diverse community of people, some of whom have been Christians a little while, and some are literally in the door. Because of their background, some would struggle to read and write, and others not so much. And actually, I've been advocating things like listening to the Bible as well as reading the Bible. And there are apps and websites and resources now which literally represent hundreds of pounds and dollars worth of scholarship and investment for free, absolutely for free.
Yes.
And I'm going, listen, grab this stuff for free. I mean, the amount of times I've said to people, look, if you want like good introductions into the books of the Bible, grab the Bible Project, listen to some of the stuff they're doing. It's absolutely superb scholarship, and it's condensed into relatively accessible language.
Yes.
And you don't need to know Hebrew or Greek to actually pick up on this stuff. And my goodness, I wish some of that resource had been available to me as a teenager, or even going to Bible college, where you could just like jump on and grab a whole host of stuff for free. So we are incredibly blessed. I mean, incredibly blessed. And we with a little bit of guidance and help, the resources out there can help us, if we're really interested, getting pretty close to the meaning of most of the Bible. To help us understand what was actually being said, not what we would like it to say, of course, but what is actually being said before we start going anywhere with that. And I think, my goodness, what a blessing that is for us to be sitting in the midst of that.
The thing as well is that also, I think, good for us to say that having a Bible translation that you just enjoy reading
Indeed
is also important as well. So Eugene Peterson would not have said that he designed the Message so that we would be able to do in-depth Bible studies off the back of it. What he wanted us to do was just enjoy hearing Scripture being read. Tom Wright doing similar things in his translation. And I use an old version of the Psalms, the old Coverdale translation of the Psalms sometimes to read them, because I just love the poetry of it. And I think that's good and well to hear those things and love those things.
Absolutely. I mean, I've just finished a little mini cycle within my devotions on Psalm 119, and I've been reading that not only in my NIV, but trying to slowly walk through it in Hebrew, but also reading alongside it David Stern's translation, the Jewish Bible. And some of his insights and the way he translates certain of the verses are just absolutely gorgeous. And it's made me, I need to rethink that. I need to look at that again. Didn't quite see that. Is that what's there? Am I missing that? And you realize then, even in the NIV, it's making some beautiful poetic interpretations, whereas Stern will tend to be a bit more literal in the translation, and even throw in like the original Hebrew words to help you. So instead of law, he'll throw in Torah. Instead of commands, he'll read mitzvot. He won't use the name Yahweh, but he'll replace it with capitalized Adonai. And you get little reminders. Oh, yes. And actually, again, it's so different that it's fresh, and the freshness makes you think, oh, have I read that right? Have I
Yeah.
understood that properly? That's a very different way of reading that verse than I seem to be reading it in the NIV.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, can be super helpful in helping us to understand what may actually be originally intended in the text.
Yes. Yeah. And so this, so maybe this is the link then from our immense privilege of having all these translations. We come to a Bible text today where Paul is in the complete other end of the spectrum.
He
and more
really
than
is.
likely has no translations with him.
Absolutely. Anything that Paul's doing with the scriptures is from his memory now. And again, we've talked about this before. My goodness, reaching as they did maybe in Philippines, in Acts 16, in Philippi, reaching for the scriptures and the Psalms and the prayers. And undoubtedly, Paul may have some scrolls with him, but the chances are any biblical reflections here are memorized reflections, and he's in a very restricted context, and yet, as we're going to see, the Holy Spirit can still work and move in that restricted context.
Absolutely.
So
we're going to read from
yeah.
Act 27 then, aren't we?
That's it. We are now into chapter 27. We are literally turning the bend of the home straight, ladies and gentlemen. We can see the finishing tape of the book of Acts. It's coming into view, and we're hitting 27 today. And you're going to read the first 12 verses or so for us.
Yes,
Is that okay, David?
I am. It's
do go for it.
So, beginning in verse 1 of 27, it says, "When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. From there we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coasts of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete opposite Salomne. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lycia. Much time had been lost, and the sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, 'Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also.' But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest."
Seems like a lot of just incidental information there, but I think the first thing that, and I hope our listeners caught that wherever they're listening to this, we have, of course, the emphasis on we here. So it's we is the whole way through. So we've got Dr. Luke is definitely on the ship with us. And probably by the end of writing this, he wished he hadn't have been actually, but he's on this ship. And because occasionally we've seen the we passages before. And then, of course, it becomes a narrative just explaining Paul, where Luke clearly wasn't there, or at least he writes as if he's not there. But we've got a very definite sense that Luke is very much experiencing this. So at an eyewitness level, what we're about to see on this journey and what we've already witnessed, that probably relates to the depth of the detail. I mean, the detail in this opening first 12 verses is quite incredible, isn't it? Like, he doesn't just say, "Oh, yeah, we set sail and we arrived at," but he's given us tons of detail, which is just classic Dr. Luke. Yes. He's just like filling in the blanks. It's like, if I'd been on a ministry trip and came home and, before the days when we could FaceTime each other constantly, Dawn would say to me, "How was the trip?" And, I would say, "Great." No, that's not what she wants to hear. No, I want details. Tell me every detail. And I literally would have to make notes to
Yeah,
remind myself of what to tell her. Not now, of course, with FaceTime and instant messaging
yeah,
and wall to wall internet. We can literally do it as we go.
yeah,
But Luke is given us not just headlines here; he's given us
yeah,
lots of detail, which again leans into this eyewitness. I'm actually there
yeah.
on that journey.
Dr. Luke is the type of person that would tell us what flavor snacks we got from the petrol station on the way home, isn't he?
It's, he really would, yeah. In fact, we're surprised that's not sort of included in this story as well. But yes, it's but like that detail is important for us,
Yes,
and because this journey does get fairly spectacular, and
yes.
some of the things that are going on, you might go, "Oh, really? Really? Did that really happen? Did Paul really do that? And actually, we can trust the account because Dr. Luke says, yeah, it really did because I was there.
Mm.
And this really did happen.
The the thing that really sort of struck me, even again reading it out loud to everybody, is, and I don't mean this, I hope this doesn't sound disrespectful to anybody, but it reminds me of reading Lord of the Rings. It reminds me of reading the Chronicles of Narnia. And it actually, I think it's intentionally framed to sound like the great sea voyages of ancient Greek literature, right?
Yeah.
And I've pondered this, whether is Luke doing this on purpose at some level, where like Odysseus is on this great journey, which is the stuff of lore in the Greco-Roman world. But he's the hero. He's at the front of the ship and he's leading the way, right? And they're conquering lands and they're battling storms. But there's him. He's the man at the front. And then in this text, Paul is our hero of the story, and he's on this great sea voyage. But he's not in control of his being. He's not in control of what's happening. And I'm fascinated as to how intentionally Luke's drawing that, like, this is our hero, but my goodness, he doesn't look like the hero that you learn about in school. And that's going to be important because neither does Jesus. But
Indeed.
I mean, do you sense that in this text?
Yeah, I mean, you do certainly. If we had have read all 44 verses of the chapter, I know in future podcasts we will do a bit of that. If we'd have read the whole thing from beginning to end, I think you would have got an even greater sense of that. You get a real sense of almost, my goodness, we are witnessing, a great scene in an incredible journey and an incredible sort of adventure that is going on, and the bigness and vastness of all of this, and the sense that the storm seems to be sweeping them along and there seems to be no control, and yet in the midst of it all, somehow the Lord is working.
Yes.
The Lord is speaking. Paul is responding. Paul is standing confident on certain ideas and certain principles. Even though there's a foreboding right at the beginning of this journey, there's a sense, this doesn't feel good. Something's going to go wrong here. But you do get the sense of that. And of course, not only in that sort of great Greek literature, but also there is an echo even in things like biblical literature, where you have some great voyages and interesting voyages. I mean, I can't think of storms and ships and not think of Jonah.
Yes.
And you sort of think, okay, here's a almost a story that is the antithesis of the Jonah story. Here's Jonah getting away from the Lord and a storm compelling him towards purpose. And yet here's Paul surrendered. I appeal to Caesar, in chains. I think we should remember this is a prison ship. It's not a ship taking Paul to Rome. This is Paul on a prison ship. So he is one prisoner of many in the context of this. And yet there's a sense in which he's absolutely in the center of the will of God.
Yes.
And therefore he's secure. So I do love the juxtaposition. Paul is our hero, yet he's bound up and seemingly out of control. He's no control over the circumstances. And yet, as the story progresses, he seems to have sort of more influence and more control than he should have in that moment. And you do get that lovely paradox juxtaposition within that.
He is just one of a number. So he's our hero. And we see this character who is so influential even in our world today. And yet in this story, he's just a prisoner amongst the prisoners.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that's quite interesting, isn't it?
It is. And I think when you keep, so I think we've got to keep remembering that we're following the story. But of course, if we were just then picking up, if this was a series of episodes in a box set or an Amazon or a Netflix that we were watching, and we jumped into episode 20 when they're getting onto the boat, then actually Paul is just one of many. But of course, we've been tracking Paul since episode 5. So so for us, there's a context to Paul's journey. But remember, everybody else on that ship, Paul's just a number. He's just a prisoner and facing an uncertain future as he heads towards Rome. And I think that even, for me, it even puts into context this lovely little statement that we've got in verse 3. It says, the next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. So you've got this remarkable little moment that Paul is one prisoner on a prison ship, and yet again, a centurion takes special interest in Paul. And you get this again, I think, as we're tracking through the book of Acts, you're getting this providential nudge again. So here's again what seems to be a random centurion, although we're given his name, Julius. And this man, like centurions before him or Romans before him, has shown extraordinary kindness. In fact, I love the word that's used here for kindness. It's philanthropos. From which we get a whole variety of gorgeous words around that idea. And here's Julius showing philanthropy, as it were, showing kindness and generosity to this prisoner. He's just an ordinary prisoner. And yet, for some reason or another, Julius takes some interest in him and allows for some, we assume, provisions to be stocked up on so that they can bring it back on. And again, it's something for us to remember on the prison ships. We're talking, this is not a cruise, so this is minimum care. So as long as you stay alive to be getting to court or whatever, or to be executed, whatever your situation. But it's not like they're going to be given 3 square meals a day and looked after and be able to watch their favorite show on a TV. This is pretty awful stuff. This is hard work. And therefore the provisions of friends could literally keep Paul and the core group, Aristarchus and Luke, alive on the context of this journey. Because there's not going to be a whole heap of generosity on this ship. It'll be dog eat dog, really. And that's why even Julius stands out, a hardened centurion showing kindness, generosity to Paul.
And there's a wonderful, I'm so glad you picked up on that philanthropy, type philanthropos, that language. But there's almost a little clash even in Luke's language, which, I mean, this is what I love when we slow down and pay attention to this. Because notice in verse 4, the winds were against us. So you're seeing this dramatic picture being painted that everything seems to be driving against Paul. I was thinking as you were talking a few minutes ago, like they're on the edge of shipwreck.
Indeed.
Like imagine if that ship goes down. Paul's just one prisoner in their opinion amongst many. That ship goes down with Luke and Paul. I mean, let me be dramatic for a second. We lose the book of Acts.
That's right.
We lose Paul's ministry. Maybe we're not Christians. you know what I mean? Like,
it's incredible.
And so even the nature itself feels like it's against them. I mean, I think I don't think I'm overreading to sort of say that Luke's painting this picture of, I mean, this is like a deep, deep struggle. The work that they've been doing, which has started all those chapters ago in Acts. I mean, it is getting and even at some level, his painful detail of all the sections of the trip slows the whole story down for us.
It does.
It's like, don't miss. And things are so slow now that the only good thing we can talk about is a Roman centurion that was kind.
Yeah.
And his kindness shines in this really difficult environment where nature itself, which in so many of the Old Testament narratives, nature works with the people of God.
That's right. Yeah.
Here we have this situation where, Paul is full of the Spirit. Even nature is not giving him a hand, if that makes sense.
It's lovely. It really is beautiful. And as you say, as we slow that down, we do get the sense that, even the journey is slow progress. It's really hard work. Yeah. And of course, to put it in context for our listeners, it seems because of the mention of Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, this journey would have been undertaken somewhere mid to late September, even early October. So for North American friends, it would be in the fall. You call that the fall, right? We call that autumn here. So the danger with that is that obviously weather changes quite dramatically. It gets much colder, and some of the journeying routes are under threat simply because of the climate that is changing. So that sense that actually even the urgency to sort of push ahead with this trip when they might have made a decision to winter somewhere and just get through the worst months of travel and then move on. All of this is all playing to this sense of drama that's happening round Paul. And the sense that actually, even though he's on his way to Rome, it feels like even that journey is going to be fraught with difficulty and challenge and surprises, which come our way. And it seems, David, that Paul picks this up. Now we're not given detail if he picks this up by the Spirit or just by human discernment. So, verse 9, much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them. Now we're not sure how Paul is warning them, but he says, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also." And then it says, but the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot. And why not? Like, who's Paul? How many ships does Paul own, and how many ships does Paul sail? I mean, like, to be fair to the centurion, if you're going to listen to advice, who am I going to listen to? The pilot of the ship, because this is his job, or some like Jewish rabbi guy who's a little bit extreme and a little bit strange? Naturally you would listen to the pilot of the boat. But there's no sense that this is coming from the Spirit. It's just, it's whether Paul's just picking this up. And even in Paul, there is a sense of foreboding that this trip is not going to go well. And yet, David, he's in the center of the will of God. Yet God wants him to go to Rome. He will eventually stand before Caesar, and he will do what he has to do. So there's a lot of tensions in the story as we consider this.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because at some level, I mean, at every level, you're right. Dr. Luke doesn't tell us how has Paul come to make this statement here, which in a sense, I've been pondering this. In one sense, it's funny given the level of detail he's gone into with everything else.
Indeed.
This is a common frustration that we have with the good doctor, isn't it? That occasionally he gives us lots of data and occasionally not quite as much as we would like. And I wonder, though, if the way to read this is to actually say that Luke has set Paul up for us in such a way that Paul is led by the Spirit. So Paul, I'm trying to edge carefully and not say something that could sound blasphemous here.
No, I know what you mean.
But Paul is so aligned with the Spirit that Luke doesn't feel the need to really if Paul's speaking, it's coming from a place of prayer. It's coming from a place of being in the Spirit. I mean, I hope I've said that without trying to say that like Paul has become the Spirit, but you hear what I'm I think we're getting with Paul here.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, Luke does this sort of in his gospel. Now, again, this could sound blasphemous, so please, listeners, don't hear what we're not saying. But he follows the same pattern in the gospel with Jesus. You have in the first 4 chapters of Luke's gospel a saturation of charismatic activity, culminating in the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me.
Yes.
And then after that, Jesus does a lot of work. And I think we are to assume that all the work Jesus is doing that looks like the work of Isaiah 61, which he quotes in Luke 4, is by the Spirit. So he doesn't need to keep saying, Jesus by the Spirit, heal the sick, Jesus by the Spirit, touch the leper. We're assuming that when the lepers get healed in Luke 17, when the woman gets healed in Luke 14, when people are transformed, when Zacchaeus is impacted by the kingdom, that this is all being led by the Spirit. I think it's a similar idea here. I'm not putting Paul on the same level as Jesus, so don't hear that. But neither am I mitigating the idea that Luke is doing something similar potentially with Paul that he does with Jesus. He's showing him to be a Spirit-filled man. So the assumption is when he makes statements like this, we could, with care, say he's doing this by the Spirit, even though it is not explicit in the text. And I think if you chose to say he did it by the Spirit, I don't think most Pentecostal charismatics would push back on you. Although to be strictly correct, it's implied. It's implicit rather than explicit in the text, and we do need to be honest about that. But I certainly would sit where you sit on that. I think that's what Luke is doing.
And I think that there's this fascinating, like the little verses, the way they work together. So you have Paul speaking, saying, okay, I can see our voyage is going to be disastrous. And then you have the verse 11, but the NIV renders it, the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship, which is a good translation of this. But there's a little subtlety in the Greek where it almost reads, he was more persuaded, or he was more trusting. So, so like I say, I'm not criticizing followed the advice as a translation, but I love that nuance of when the chips were down, he more trusted the owner and the pilot, which is I think this beautiful tension of this passage, that you've got a centurion working against nature to be kind to Paul, but he can't work against his perception of power. The owner and the pilot, they must be the ones to listen to, not the one who we know is of the Spirit and his life is at risk because of his following of the Spirit. And I think there's a beautiful, I don't know that we need to unpack it. I think our listeners have heard enough of us to know where we stand on this, but you're welcome to unpack it. There's a beautiful Lucan theme in that we wouldn't see if you just had these two verses. I think you say that's a stretch, but the least, the lost, and the ignored can say the things of the Spirit, right? That you don't listen. And I think once you've read as much Luke as we have, it's hard not to think that that's a very Lucan idea that we're just stumbling into there, isn't it?
It's so good. It's a beautiful reflection, Dave. It really is lovely. Hadn't quite seen that in verse 11. I've just looked it up while you were reflecting, and I love that that sort of sense of persuaded across that. But I do love this idea that actually, again, in Julius, you're hearing something, and Luke is giving voice to people and giving inclusion to people that are normally excluded from the story. Again, if you were writing this only as a biography of Paul, then you just leave some of this detail out. But Luke is including a whole range of individuals and voices because they are in the story, and actually this is part of the kingdom story for them.
Yeah.
So I do absolutely love that reflection. I think that's absolutely beautiful and totally fits with the trajectory of Dr. Luke. Yeah.
And so we end up then with this part of the story that even though, I mean, Paul does something interesting, actually. He even tries to appeal to their financial senses. He like, notice, I mean, this is how broken that world is, and perhaps how broken our world is. You know, it will bring great loss to ship and cargo and our own lives too. And it's interesting that their lives are the third thing mentioned. But I actually think we're seeing a Pauline insight into the way that broken world worked, that ship and cargo, and in fact how our world works, would be considered more valuable than prisoners are. And therefore he speaks to that. But even that's still not enough to convince them. And so you get this, going back to my Lord of the Rings and Narnia, you get this kind of the majority. So again, that least being ignored. The majority decided we should sail on. And it sort of leads us into a bit of a cliffhanger for what comes next. So that's it for this episode. We know that there's always more to explore, and we encourage you to dive into the text and do that. If you liked this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you rated, reviewed, or shared it. We also appreciate all of our listeners who financially support the show, sharing the weight of producing this podcast. If you'd like to support the show, visit twotexts.com. But that is all for now, so until next time, from John and I, goodbye.